right, so we're going to have our session 2 of the deacon leadership training tonight, and then we'll have our deacon meeting after that. Talk a little bit about our objectives. We want to review the work of elders in detail because the work of deacons is so much related to elders. We need to make sure we understand what the elders are to do, and then we can understand what the deacons are to do. We want to look at something called the 7 Pillars model, and that is a model of what the church is to be doing. Again, all of this trying to understand the bigger work that we're involved in. I want to outline 3 ways deacons can identify their work in relation to the elders. That's really what this session is about, is how do we decide what to do as deacons? How do we figure out what our work is to be? Then we want to explain the future integration of the deacons into church work. We're going to look at the way the church is sort of structured now and how a lot of the work is organized. And we want to see how we want to move more of that work into the deacons. And then finally, we want to review a key focus of the deacon work here that I want us to emphasize that I mentioned a little bit to you last time. I want to go into a little bit more detail about that. You remember in session 1, we essentially just had 2 core things we were trying to teach. The first is that the deacon was established to take the administrative load off of the elders. That was one, that we had this food distribution program that the elders were getting too involved in Jerusalem, and they said, we can't keep doing this, so we need to pass this off to some faithful men to take care of this. So it was to pass that load off from the elders to another set of men that we call deacons. And then we made the point that the deacon work was administrative at its core. And we talked about how that we've kind of lost that in the modern church. The deacon is really everything but an administrator. But if you're going to run a food distribution network like that, you have to be an administrator, somebody who can organize things and lead people and get things done. That's really what we talked about. So let's build on that now and let's ask the question, how do we as deacons decide what to do? Okay, Wes, we see that the elders are doing something and we're supposed to be doing something, but exactly what is that? Well, before we get to the question of what and how deacons can figure out what they are to do, let's look a little bit more specifically at the work of the elders. And then we can juxtapose the work of the deacons off of that. All right, so according to Acts 6, 1 through 4 that we just read, what was that key phrase that they used there at the end of those verses that the apostles were going to give themselves to continually? Yes, to the ministry of the word and to prayer. That is the crystallization of all the work of elders. So, but that's a pretty broad statement, isn't it? I mean, that's a big umbrella if we're going to put things under. So let's talk about it a little bit for a moment. What kinds of things do you think could fall under this idea of being focused on prayer and the ministry of the word? Prayer and the ministry of the word. What kinds of things will the elders be doing if they're doing that? Let me just talk to you briefly about things that this means. Okay, you said preaching and teaching, so that's already there. And I'm not going to write out teaching. Preaching and teaching. What about leading? The shepherd, which is one of the words that's used for an elder or pastor, is one who leads the sheep. Come on, let's go this way. So providing direction to the church overall and individual teams is the work of the elders. The elders are to be giving direction to the deacons, to the sound team, to the music team. When an elder doesn't have to ask permission. That's their role is to get involved and help lead those. What about counseling? Ollie, as in your years of pastoring, how much counseling did you do? Well, like, did they come to you for advice, ask you anything? You know, that would be counseling. How about encouraging under this? Encouraging people, correcting them, and rebuking them. That's a part of the work. And I'll just leave that all as counseling. But we normally we want to stop with encouraging. But we're supposed to correct members, and we're supposed to rebuke as well. And the word rebuke that's used in Timothy is a very strong word. It's kind of a little bit of a chastisement. How about just time with the sheep? So I know Ollie and James in particular, they go out and see, I think it's every Thursday, they try to go and visit with the sheep. I'm kind of the guy that takes people to lunch. You know, I think I've been to lunch with everybody but Stan, and Stan's on my list. But I like to take men out to lunch, and because I find that really helps with the relationship. But just be with them, and that gives you a chance to lead. That gives you a chance to counsel, you know, all those things. How about this one? Conflict resolution. Is that important in a church? What do you think, Gary? Is it important for the elders to be finding any areas of discord and trying to help the people grow through it and not let it get out of hand? Because we see a lot of conflict in churches, don't we? Yeah, and that's one of the reasons you need more than one elder, because you need a lot of different personalities to deal with all the people that are there. Now, here's one that I think a lot of modern pastors have lost, and that is evangelizing. In 2 Timothy 4:5, Paul says, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of your ministry. And that means if you're not, as an elder, if you're not engaging lost people, then you are not fulfilling all the ministry that you're supposed to be fulfilling. And I remember when that verse hit me a few years back, I was like, ooh, that's not an option, Wes. You have to do this. All right, then we have 7 here, and I guess 7 works well. We have to manage the deacons. That's our role, isn't it? We just talked about from Acts 6. Praying, we talked about that also already. And then number 9, what I was going to just point out here is not really number 9, but what I want to show you is, and as we transition into the 7 pillars model, is who does this represent? Who is it that did all of these perfectly? Jesus Christ. You see, when you start looking at the work of elders, what you see is it is a replica, if you will, of the work of Christ Himself. That the elder is supposed to be doing the things, and none of us can do it perfectly, and we're going to be strong in areas and not so strong in others, but the elders are supposed to be representing Christ very fully in the work that they do. You see that? So this is all, Christ Himself. All right? And as I studied that, I start to realize that. So those are the things that we're to do. So that the elders are to ensure the church is doing all that Christ requires. All right, so our job is to do all of these things and make sure the church is doing everything it's supposed to do. Now look at your notes there, and let's look at the 7 pillars model. Do you see the little graphic I gave you there? Again, as we talk about elders, but also as we talk about deacons, all of us are supposed to be working together to make sure that the church is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing. Now let me ask you, when you ask most Baptists what the church is here to do, what do they say? What's the common things that pastors and preachers will say that the church is supposed to be doing? Okay, so reaching the lost. Okay, so reaching the lost. What's the other one that comes up? And then discipling, which is what Ollie just said. Reaching them and discipling them. And where does that come from? Yeah, that comes from the Great Commission. All right, but the problem with the Great Commission, not so much a problem with the Great Commission, but our narrow focus on the Great Commission, is that we miss so many other things that Jesus also said we are to be doing and we are to be about. And if you just focus on these 2 things and you just have this narrow mind, that's only all we're supposed to do, you miss a lot of the other things that He said for us to do. So I came up with what I call the 7 pillars model, and you see a picture, a little graphic there on the top of one of your pages. But also, if you turn over to Addendum 1, turn over and you should see a table that lays out these 7 things. All right? Now, what I've done here is I've tried to find those areas in the Bible which tell us, where the New Testament, where the Lord tells us, or His apostles tell us what we're supposed to be doing, as much as we're supposed to be doing reaching the lost and discipling the people, okay? So let's look at these 7 here. The first is what I call the pillar of truth. The church is to maintain a witness to the truth of the Bible in all areas, especially those which are attacked by Satan in the world at that time. 1 Timothy 3:15. I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. So we are to hold up a witness of the truth of the Bible to the society, to the culture, to the world, to God's people at all times. That's a part of what we are to do. All right? Especially, notice I said this, especially those areas which are attacked by Satan in the world at that time. You see, the kingdom is always attacked. The kingdom is a spiritual kingdom, and it is a kingdom of ideas, isn't it? It's really a kingdom of ideas and truth. It's not a kingdom of buildings. It's not a kingdom of weapons. It's a kingdom of ideas. And Satan is, throughout history, he is always trying different areas to get into and break down that kingdom by breaking down its ideas. Now, we are in a time when they're attacking ideas. The pillar of mercy. The church is to wear itself out, serving the needs of the poor and destitute as a demonstration of the love of God for mankind. James 1:27. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit or help orphans and widows in their trouble. So they're saying, look, if you have true religion, you've got to be doing this. If you're not doing this, then you're not really following true religion. Oh, I'm trying to be righteous. I'm trying to be holy. I'm trying to be pure. Well, it's two things there. It's to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and the second part is to keep oneself unspotted from the world. That's the holy, personal part, okay? Teaching. The church is to teach disciples all that Christ has instructed them in the Bible, bringing them to maturity and fruit-bearing. So that's really kind of that one right there, okay? Because a disciple is a learner, so we got to teach them so they can be learners. Provision. The church is to seek to meet the genuine spiritual, physical, and financial needs of the believers under her care. We have a responsibility to take care of our people. You know that we're over, Gary, you might remember that we're over the benevolence fund here as deacons. Well, what is benevolence? It's provision. We're always talking, I've talked to you about keeping your eyes open for people who need stuff, because that's part of what we're supposed to do. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Galatians 6:10. You see how these are as full as legitimate a command as these two are. So, if we're doing this, you see, we might not do this. If we're doing this, we might not do that. If we're doing this, we might not even talk about this because we're like, oh, it's just about the gospel. We're just going to teach the gospel. We don't need to talk about life. Well, wait a minute. Life, we're supposed to work on mercy. We're supposed to work on mercy and truth. Well, who's having mercy for the unborn babies if we're not going to do it, you see? So when you just focus on that, you can miss things. Number 5, salt and light. For the good of the nations, the church is to attempt to influence the cultures in which she finds herself towards righteousness and fairness. Matthew 5:13 and 14, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. So what is he saying? What is salt back in that day, Stan? It wasn't really a seasoning, was it? What was it primarily?
To purify.
It was to purify and it was to preserve. So, they would salt their meat to keep it from spoiling. Well, think about that. You're the salt of the earth. You keep the earth from spoiling. And I think part of the reason that abortion's gone so far, that homosexuality's gone so far, is that the church has not done this. And then we're not really working on that. We're just, we just got to make disciples. We don't talk about anything else. Number 6 is prayer. Pillar of evangelism. So prayer obviously, my house will be called a house of prayer. That means that we are to be characterized by praying. We just stop and pray. Let's pray about it. Let's pray about it. And then evangelism is definitely part of it, you see, but that's not the only thing. You see, that's only teaching and evangelism are only 2, okay? So as we think about what elders are to do, the elders are to lead us in that, in doing all of that. And as deacons, we have to keep in mind that what we're supporting is to do all of this work. Not just to do these, but we're here to help the elders do all of this. Yes. Right. And see, really, in the Great Commission, you've got, Jesus said, go into the world, make disciples of all the nations. And then he says, what does he say there about what you're to teach them? Anybody remember? Teach them what? All things I have commanded you. All things. All things. Okay? All things. Life, sex, marriage, gender, of course, prayer and works of mercy and all those disciplines, of course. But all the things that I've taught you. And what is Christ's Word? Just the New Testament? No, it's the whole. It's the whole word, the Bible. Okay, so what I'm trying to get you to do is see the broader picture. When we just talk about this, yeah, you're right, Josh. In there is all of this, but we lose that in the translation, if you will. When we talk about the Great Commission, we kind of forget that, well, that's a heck of a lot more than just sharing a tract and having a Bible study. You see what I'm saying? All right, so let's talk about the three ways that the deacons are to support the elders as they try and do all of this. First of all, in Acts 6, how did the deacons in Acts 6, how did they figure out what to do? The apostles gave them that work, didn't they? Go out, find 7 men of good reputation, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. See, it's helping me memorize it. That we may appoint over this work. You see? The elders told the deacons what to do. And that's the first way that the deacons get their work, is that the elders assign it. Now, don't take that term assign as if it's making deacons out to be, little slaves. That's not it. Servants. But okay, so just don't take that word the wrong way. But the elders, and we're going to talk about this in our elders meeting on Saturday, we have to begin to look for work that we need the deacons to do for us. Because look at the model in Acts 6. We can't do this. And I went the other day and I looked at a couple of our elders meeting agendas. And on some of those agendas, probably half of the things listed there are actually deacon work. Now, we're not complaining about it. Nobody's upset about it, but all of us are learning, the elders included, how we can do better at this. So the elders are to assign that work. But let me ask you this. As the deacons, if we know that the elders are to assign work to us, what can we do proactively to get work from the elders? Ask. Pastor James, what do you need? How can the deacons help you? Pastor Ollie, Pastor Wes, how can the deacons help you? You see, it becomes our responsibility. Now, we're to identify stuff and say, hey, guys, can you do this for me? But what else can you do? That one. But you can notice what the elders are doing. And if you see an elder in a task, you go, the deacons really ought to be doing that for James or Ollie or Wes. You bring it to the deacons or you take care of it. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to get us to do here through the lesson tonight is be more proactive in looking for work. Not just waiting. The elders need to tell us, but let's be proactive. So elders are going to assign it. We're going to work on that as elders to get us more work to do. But the second is take care of any non-spiritual task or address any non-spiritual issue, problem, or need that is not being handled effectively by others in the church. So we got the elders looking out for work for us, and we're looking at the elders to make sure that we're helping them. But this here basically says you don't have to be told what to do by the elders. You have the model in the Scripture, you see? You've got the elders. That's why we went through all of their work. They're supposed to be focusing on that. And if you see anything else in the church, let's go through this. Any non-spiritual task, that means work, non-spiritual work. Ollie does a lot of construction work at the church. And if you think about it, construction is square in the middle of what deacons should be responsible for and be managing. It's non-spiritual work, isn't it? Now, again, the purpose isn't to point out where we're say, well, why aren't we doing it? It's just to show you that any task that's non-spiritual, we can do. Now, here's the other part. Address any non-spiritual issue, problem, or need that is not being handled effectively by the others in the church. All right, so we got work that needs to be done, but then we got issues or needs among the people that fits into that Acts 6 category that we can take on and get done. Do you see that? If there's any question as to whether or not the deacon should do something, they should go get guidance from the elders. It is each deacon's responsibility to seek out, identify, and bring back to the deacon body things that need to be done. And this is the point I'm trying to get across to you, is I've let you know all of these things so you can start to keep your eyes out. And what this means is the deacons, if you're a deacon or you're going to be a deacon, then you need to be involved in the church more than just coming to a service. Coming to services is great, but you see, in order for you to identify needs, you have to be with the people, talking to the people, paying attention to what's going on with the people. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be here every time the doors are open, but just it becomes a responsibility of yours to get more involved so you can see what needs to be done. Does that make sense? Okay, and then the third thing, and we'll just hit this briefly. Make the elders aware of issues. Make the elders aware of issues. Okay, so we saw that the elders were to be working on all the spiritual work. Well, one of the things that people don't like to tell the elders is when they're not happy. They want to talk among themselves, and so sometimes the elders just don't know. We're trucking along doing our thing, and we're like, it seems like everything's fine. All right, but if there's something going on, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but a need, a problem, anything like that, make us aware. As a body, be our eyes and ears out in the congregation. I want to talk about the future integration of the deacons. Take a look for me. Go over there and flip to Addendum 2, the pastoral responsibility chart there. What you have before you there is, of course, the chart that we've developed to identify which of the pastors is responsible for what ministries. The idea is that it gives you, if you have a problem, you know who to go to, all right? But if you look at those, look at those names there and see if you can identify any that you think really are deacon work and not pastor work. We talked about building and grounds. What about security? Sound. Secretary. Ushers. The deacons really ought to be involved in those and helping to manage those for the elders. But what's happened in Baptist churches, this is why we have to struggle to figure out what to do. Because we've basically just taken all the deacon work and given it to everybody else. So here's what I want to throw out to you. Look at Addendum 3 now. All right? What I did was I took the teams, the work that could possibly be really deacon work, and I pulled it out from under the elders directly. So on the top now you have the 3 elders, but what's under them is the stuff that's really going to fall under that Acts 6 prayer and ministry of the word directive. Do you see that? And then the ones in the bottom here are the ones that really ought to be deacon work. So the idea is that over time, this is what we're going to try and do here at this church, and this is why this deacon training is so important. Because over time, what we want to do is we want to pull the responsibility for sort of managing those ministries and helping them with their day-to-day work. We want to put that under the deacons and have the deacons lead and manage those teams under the direction of the elders. So we have these dark lines going down through the middle saying the elders are still over the deacons and still ultimately over the work, whatever it is. But do you see how that works there? And then what if the deacons were over building and grounds, fellowship committee, fall festival, the secretary, sound, security, ushers, and benevolence? Well, we wouldn't have to be sitting here trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, would we? We'd be very, very busy trying to get it done. So that's where we want to move, and that's sort of the point on getting to where we expand and strategically change and more deeply integrate the work of the deacons in the church. All right, so the last point to make here as we wrap up is about the future focus of the deacons here at this church. So we're going to take us a little bit of time to get to where we can break out those committees and teams and start to put them under the deacons. That'll take us a few years to slowly do. But one of the things that I want us to start working on, and we'll talk about this during our our discussion time tonight is, if you think about what was happening in Acts 6, what was really going on there is the deacons were providing, they were keeping the members of the church from becoming destitute. Isn't that what they were doing? Think about that. These were people who were at a crisis if they didn't have food, if they didn't have provision. So this was an emergency sort of situation in their context and their situation. All right? Well, can we all agree that the federal government is in a dire financial condition? Now, they don't talk like that on the TV and the news, but when you've got $4 trillion in income and you've got over $30 trillion in debt, that's almost 10 times your income in debt. So you made $100,000, that'd be $1 million in debt, right? We see the things that are going on. Do we feel like there's a possibility that things could get really bad financially and economically in this country? Well, what I am putting forward to the deacons is, what would happen if the federal government could not borrow money anymore? What would happen if the financial condition of the government got so bad that those who are now giving the government money to fund its operations stopped doing that? All right. What would happen if the federal government had to cut its spending by half?
You have a lot of people out of work.
You have a lot of people out of work, but guess what? How many at this table get their income from the federal government? Every one of you do. Yeah, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, right here in this room. But if they had to cut Social Security by half, if they had to cut their contracts by half, if they had to cut Medicare by half and Medicaid, where would this church be from an income standpoint? Where would our people be who had to get medical care? What about food? We would be in a world of trouble. It would be very much like the time of Joseph in Egypt, wouldn't it? So what the elders and what we would like us to see is, what we want to delegate is to the deacons to consider what we would need and to begin to plan out how we would start to prepare to take care of our flock and the church if that happened, to sort of be the Josephs to prep. Now that's a big task, it's a complex task and all of that, but what a great task. Yeah, so there are all kinds of different, there's economic and financial, there's the military aspect of it, there's the war in Ukraine and with Russia, there's just so many, and the problem with being so much in debt as a nation is that we simply can't afford to respond to things. What would happen if we entered into a war with Russia? I mean, how would we finance that war? So my point isn't really, there's all kinds of different scenarios. But I think we can all see that we're in a pretty perilous position. And we have a responsibility for these people. And so that's part of what I want to talk about in our meeting tonight is in this, and other churches and other deacon bodies can begin to consider this also, that how would you take care of your people? How would you take care of your pastor or pastors? How would you pay your bills? Where would you get food? What about medical care? All of these things that, oh my goodness, all of a sudden we got to provide all of that. What would we do? God helped Joseph do it in a way that was unbelievable, and he can help us prepare as well. Okay?